My name is Li-Ming Stroh. I am the co-founder and CEO of Master the World. I'm so excited to be here today. It's been a crazy month since I last saw some of you, and it's always such comfort to come back to our MTW community to do this monthly. I feel like it's a breath of fresh air. Along with me today, I've got three of our amazing Master Sommeliers. I'm going to start with who's at the top of my screen here, Madeline Triffon. Madeline, where are you coming in from?
I'm coming in from hot and humid Metro Detroit, but happy to be with you. And I agree, it's comforting to join this community always. And awesome. there's someone from Argentina, someone from Aruba, and someone from Leelanau, Michigan.
And
Yay.
Michigan, I love it. Someone
Wine country, Michigan.
Wine country, Michigan.
Yep. Love it, love it. All right, Tim, you're up next. Where are you calling us from today?
Hey, everybody, from the teeming megapolis of Rio Rancho, New Mexico. And I've already tipped my colleagues off. We have a major thunderstorm warning, and it's going to be the first precipitation in almost 80 days. So everybody's dangerously excited. But I've already let my colleagues know if I suddenly blink out that they're going to put on sock puppets and they're going to do my wines for me.
Absolutely. You know, these two guys, Tim, you can put them to the test. No problem. We put everybody else to the test, right?
Right.
So
he's
Evan,
probably just faking it. There's no range.
Evan is still basking in last night's glory. Evan, where are you coming in from?
Yeah, with my Warriors hangover. Big basketball fan here, for those of you who didn't know. I am this sock puppet is in San Francisco today and enjoying being in my home confines as I get ready to head off to Canada to judge the Canadian National Wine Competition there. So don't be surprised if you don't see some Canadian wines here down the road, but very happy to be here with everyone today, tasting, drinking, enjoying, conviviating, and guessing what wines we have in the glasses. Absolutely.
Officially welcome. Please make sure, for those of you who already opened wines, you're in kit 131A. All right, Maddie, you're up. Wine number one.
I'm up, yay. Wine number one. Taking a look at it, and it appears to be just a really beautifully bright yellow. I think our grid is agreeing with me, yay. And it has a little bit in the way of green glints, more sort of an olive, not really strong. So it's telegraphing youth, if not extreme youth, relative youth. And I'm going to go ahead and nose it, though I may decide to describe the nose and the palate in tandem. Let's see. Aromatically, this wine is very generous, very forward. It's a beautiful thing when you don't have to, you know, listen that closely to get the fragrance. And what's coming through loud and clear, almost drowning everything else out, is this perfectly ripe tree fruit. So we're talking pears and apples, and what incarnation of them? I think, at least in this tasting for me, it's more Bosc pear, brown pear, golden apple, red apple, though there's certainly a little green in there as well. And again, not overripe, but perfectly ripe. One could even say maybe a little bit of a baked quality as well, but certainly not confected or jammy. So largely tree fruit, but right on the heels of that, I smell a little bit of peach and nectarine, kind of in their white incarnation. And at the risk of sounding precious when I say that, I mean, it's not overt. It's not a strong peachy smell. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate, but before I do that, the third wave of very clear aromatics I'm getting are blossoms, specifically, you know, tree fruit blossoms, apple, a little bit of honeysuckle, really pretty honeysuckle, and maybe a little citrus blossom as well, like lime blossom. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate and see what other citrus qualities I get. Very interesting on the attack and the mouthfeel, because mid-palate, when you hold the wine, there's just a deep plum line of flavor mirroring the nose with regards to the tree fruit. There's the acidity in a little more dramatic fashion, and it's coming through as ripe citrus, AKA Meyer lemon, key lime. It's certainly palate cleansing in a good way. in a balanced way. It's not aggressively acidic or what I would call poignant. I'm going to give it one more little sniff and taste because it's my first taste of wine today. And sometimes that first approach of acidity can be torqued a little bit high. There we go. It balances it out a little bit. But certainly the checklist of citrus fruit, tree fruit, stone fruit, maybe a teeny little bit of tropical, but I'm reaching for it more in the way of sort of melon. Their green elements, very, very mild, maybe like sweet spring peas. In terms of herbal, I would say scooching towards citrus, so lemongrass or sorrel. What's coming through right now very clearly to me in the finish is it's very long and it's very mineral driven. And I would describe it specifically as a salinity to it. Quality level is high because of the length and the quality of the fruit. This wine really typifies dry fruity to me. And by that, I mean, we're always telling consumers when wine professionals use the term fruity, we mean like fruit, but it can be bone dry physiologically. There's also other whispers of flavors coming through, notably ginger. I would say, I do happen to know what this is. If I didn't and I were being utterly honest, which I think I can be, I would be sitting here going, gee, this is a very expressive, ripe, but neutral white grape variety, or possibly semi-aromatic because of the floral component. It's so pretty. One more taste, I'm greedy. So absolutely Zippo oak on this wine. I don't think they're hiding it, even in the form of neutral oak. There is a little bit of two flavors specifically in the aftertaste. I think beer, which is leesy, and honey. Like if honey could be dry, this wine has that. And a nuttiness that is coming from, I think, development. I hesitate to call it oxidation, but it's got a really nice character of almonds or pine nuts to it. And again, that length is terrific. There is a teeny little phenolic component. I know our grid says none, but I feel it. You know, the texture of my palate has changed. So I think I described that fully enough. Li Meng, shall we check out what our options are?
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a poll coming up right now. So for those of you who are with us and not use this as poll, again, this is a, sorry, let's do that again. This is an anonymous poll. You've got Sauvignon Blanc, Albarino, Pinot Gris, and other is there. If you're not thinking it's any of these three, as a great teaching moment, you can say what other things, put it in chat, what you think other, what other varieties you were thinking that it is. So Madeline, I've noticed as people are filling out the poll, I'm gonna give them about 60 seconds. There was a question on the last page that said, is it lean or smooth?
I would say both. You know, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I mean, certainly the wine doesn't have what I would call a plump profile, mouthfeel wise, though it certainly has a ton of beautiful fruit and it sleeks out on the finish. So in that respect, I would say the texture is lean, but it has a lushness to it as well because of the quality of the fruit. As you're looking at these options, everyone, you've got, and I didn't even mean to lead you, you've got Pinot Gris, Grigio, Albarino, and Sauvignon Blanc. So you've got everything ranging from a non-aromatic to a semi-aromatic to a highly aromatic grape variety. And by the way, Li Meng's not kidding when she says, please use other, because it's a teaching moment, not actually so much for you as for us. You know, it's good for us to know. And those of you who are less shy, please by all means be chatty about what you thought and why.
I'm gonna start with the first stupid question of the day, Maddie.
Love them.
What is which of each of these three is that aromatic, not aromatic, and in between?
I love it. That's a perfect question. I should have defined it. So thank you. In my universe, Pinot Gris Grigio tends to be non-aromatic, sometimes semi-aromatic, depending on where it's grown and the vintage. Albarino, can be semi-aromatic or in great years and in the hands of great producers, actually verging on highly aromatic. And then Sauvignon Blanc, if it's not highly aromatic, it's disappointing. You know, this is a grape variety that if you don't put your nose in the glass and it isn't singing a clear song, you're going, where are you? So there you have it.
Awesome. All right, so here we are. Here are the results. We have 25% on Sauvignon Blanc, 40% on Albarino, and 35% on Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. And of course, corresponding to that, you see the corresponding regions as well. You've got Portugal. I'm betting that if we had put Spain on there, it would have divided people even more. But we did do the favor of putting Italy so that it's a little bit different, and then New Zealand and California. So do you want to reveal first? What do you want to
do? Just give me 1 sec, because I think this is terrific. I love the fact that people are being honest and listening to themselves. I think if you're veering towards Sauvignon Blanc, I would make a case that it's an example that probably is a blend, and we give you that option, Sauvignon Blanc blend that has maybe been tempered with Semillon. I think I like the fact that there's almost equal votes for Albarino and Pinot Gris, and I also like the fact that there is a hat tip to the New World, notably New Zealand. So, you know, this is a varied and interesting response. So shall we see what the wine actually is?
Absolutely. All right.
It's delicious. It's very high quality. We are leaving San Francisco. Put on your face masks. We are going to the old world. We're going to northeastern Italy. We are in Alto Adige. And we're at the wonderful winery Tiefenbrunner that is spitting distance from Bolzano and is in the Italian Alps. They are truly A++ in terms of the quality of their wines. What you have here is a winery that makes a very wide range of wines, like 20-ish, from mostly cool climate white varieties ranging from, you know, Weissburgunder, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris here, and reds, Blauburgunder, Pinot Noir, Legrine, and such. And this is their, you know, one would say normale Pinot Grigio, right? But it's still very classy and very showy. It is 2019, and that makes sense to me because it's dropped off, you know, it's changed its color just slightly, and you can see why paying attention to color and not phoning it in is important deductively, in this case, vintage. Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio, just to remind us all, are one and the same thing, but their expression is very different in northeastern Italy as opposed to, frankly, other places in Italy or Alsace or Oregon. And this is in the Alto Adige part of Trentino, Alto Adige. What else to tell you while we look at what other cool pictures we've got? Yes, the climate here. Certainly you're at high altitudes, depending on what vineyard they are harvesting from, ranging in their vineyards from 1,000 to 3,000 feet above sea level. That's significant, which means you have, common sense will tell you, and it's true, significant diurnal swings. It's a Mediterranean climate, but it's moderated not just by the nighttime swings in temperature, but also the cooling winds coming from the north, alpine winds, and also it's got sufficient rainfall. And interestingly, in this area, pergola training was used as a matter of course. It then sort of modernized, but the Tiefenbrunners are veering back towards it because they find that they get optimum, well, ventilation, obviously, but also sun exposure. You know, they can jimmy rig that. I will tell you that I am not surprised everyone didn't beeline to Italian Pinot Grigio because it's got a lushness to it that is the thumbprint of a superlative producer. And I think that, yes. Important to recognize that in this area, you have an almost equal blend of German and Italian cultures that is reflected in down to their cuisine. So in this area of the world, you might be drinking a little of this with smoked meat and goulash. This is not a picture of the couple that runs the estate, but their team. But Sabine and Christoph, Christoph is 4th generation Tiefenbrunner, run the estate. They're not tiny. You know, they produce, I think, if I got my information correct, around 800,000 cases, but they're not, you know, huge either. They are using their estates as a base, but they also buy from other growers. Oh, dear friends, would you like to add anything to that?
Before we go there are a couple of questions that I want to make sure.
Mhm.
Jerry, if you don't mind, your question went out to only the panelists. So to help everyone else, if you don't mind copying and putting it to everyone, that would be really helpful. But I'll read it out here, Madeline. When I listened to your description, says Jerry, you picked up Blossom, which was not easy for me to detect. With Blossom detected, I put Pinot Gris last on my list. So is Pinot Gris supposed to have blossom in your mind as a mark?
That's a great question. I mean, the reality is, depending on your conditioning and your ability to perceive anything, you know, you're going to pick up all sorts of different things in wines. But Pinot Grigio doesn't have a stop sign when it comes to floral. You know, it just may not mean that it is the dominant driving, recognizable, aka hackneyed comment classic expression of the grape variety aromatically, the way it is for Albarino. Conversely, you could have an Albarino where you're going, where's the beef? Where are the flowers? You know, where you expect more and you don't get it, maybe in a particular bottling, or it could be just the mood the wine's in at the time. You know, it could be the age of it, your own ability to perceive it at a given point in time. So I would say, no, classically, Pinot Grigio doesn't have flowers at, you know, the top of the checklist of how you identify it, but it doesn't mean that an expression of Pinot Grigio won't contain it. I hope that makes sense.
Tim, I look like you were going to say something too.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, since the Consorzio in Alto Adige was one of my clients for about 8 years. So I know Tiefenbrunner really well. I've been there. You know, 70% of all the wine produced in Alto Adige, first of all, it's a small, you know, in the context of Italian regions, it's one of the smallest. And it's very alpine. Most of the vineyards are on steep hillsides because the valley floors are planted to apples, believe it or not. Tiefenbrunner is one of the best, if not the best, family-owned wineries, and they've owned and been producing for over 150 years. They now are almost completely biodynamic, which is unusual because it's so expensive to use biodynamics on really steep vineyards because it's so labor intensive. What else about Alto Adige? You know, this is where, you know, one of the few times you can say this in the wine world, the best Pinot Grigios in Italy come from Alto Adige, period. And the reason is because it's the quality of the vineyards, they have low yields, age of vines, and just really good people making the wines. So, and what else about it? You know, 70% of all wine in the region is produced by co-ops, which is very unusual. But in this case, the co-ops are owned by the vineyard owners. And so the rules that they operate under are very strict. And one of the top producers, Cantina Turlano or Turlan, is a co-op, and they make some of the best white wines in Italy.
Including their Pinot Grigio, which is terrific.
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah.
Tiefenbrunner is one of my favorites. And anything they make is really exceptional. Their Pinot Bianco, I think, is quintessential white wine by the glass in a restaurant. So,
by the way, thank you for quantifying the alcohol and the acidity, which I neglected to do. But I agree with you, medium alcohol, medium plus acidity. And actually, one parting shot on this wine, Limang, this is an exceptional producer. And, you know, it sort of nudges you into, when you can, spend 20 bucks as opposed to 10 bucks. I think it's great to imprint, you know, we're not being snobs. It's just an issue of, you know, we just mentioned Terlan Pinot Grigio, which is, you know, a co-op. But as good a wine you can buy, you're doing yourself a favor in terms of training, conditioning your conscious and subconscious to recognize quality.
Yes, it's as we segue out of this into wine. I think this is I'm smiling as I was reading or listening more to the comments and everything. For many people, and certainly many people in the trade who get over time a little bit wine precious about stuff. The running joke is that Pinot Grigio is Italian for no flavor, because so much of it, particularly things that are not coming from the quality areas. And let's face it, Pinot Grigio is planted in the Veneto, it's planted in the South, planted everywhere. They become seemingly more and more innocuous as you get further from the original sources in Friuli, Alto Adige, etc. When they are good, they are exceptional wines. In this case, I think you do literally quantify the lower yields in your mouth in terms of the texture, the flavor concentration, etc. Because Pinot Grigio, it can oftentimes be lemon water to a lot of people. I mean, just it's got a little bit of acid and all that, but other than that, there's not much going there. So I think it is important that when you show people examples of wine, hopefully this is a bit of a head turner for some people who may not have had really good Italian Pinot Grigio before. This, I think, is quote unquote about as good as it gets in that regard. And that is because it's from really good vineyards, really good general area, and from a family winery that really cares and has a great legacy and history in it. Well, if you haven't already thrown yourself into glass number 2, it's a very different wine than wine number 1. Right off the bat, the color is a bit deeper and a bit richer, which could, again, as we know from our own experience here, speak to age. It could speak to wood, spending time in oak or not, and it could speak to skin contact or other things like that. Again, we don't know much about it at this point in time, except to say that it has a richness and a depth to it. The color I would put in sort of that deeper yellow, pushing kind of a slightly brassier color there. But as to why it is that way, I don't know at that point in time. As I swirl it around in the glass, I would say that the viscosity is moderate. The tears are forming. They're relatively thick, but they fall relatively fast in my glass. So that sort of speaks to me of the general world of moderate. As we go to the nose here, right off the bat, it's a little bit quote unquote unusual in the sense that, people are so used to picking up, I always tell people look for a few terms in wine: fruit, earth, and wood there. And the fruit here is very, very subdued. The strength of this wine is a very strong, dominant mineral character to it. It's almost, it is at once chalky, it's a little bit flinty. Dare I say it's a little bit of the smoky side that earth brings you, a little bit gunflinty, all of that stuff going on and really driving through the nose to the point where you're sitting there, pushing through. It is very much inorganic earth. It is really not much about organic earth. And for those of you who get confused and puzzled, that organic earth would be living earth. So like soil, mud, humus, all sorts of things that come from the living earth, whereas inorganic earth would be rocks and anything relating to the rock sort of thing here. That to me is what speaks there. As I swirl through it, I'm also not getting a lot of wood or anything that would suggest wood to me. And in the fruit thing, which is probably the thing I'm gonna have to do last, I'm gonna wait really till I get to the palate there. If I go down my checklist of other things to look for, am I getting other sort of other herbs and vegetables and things like that? Perhaps a little bit of sorrel. Perhaps again we're in that kind of citrusy, leaner vein of things. Whether you call it sort of a yuzu-y thing or a kumquat, loquat thing or a strong lemony thing or something like that. There is a shrillness to the nature of the fruit, and the fruit does probably come off more citric than anything else. So any herbs that would pertain to that, be it a verbena thing, be it a sorrel thing, be it a lemongrassy thing, are generally going to be in there. There isn't anything strong and green, if you will, by itself. You're not picking up on basil or coriander or any of those other things that you can at times pick up here. I'm not picking up on anything strong vegetatively. One could argue that maybe there's a slight brininess or something like a hint of green olive or a little bit there. Perhaps a caperberry, maybe something like that, but it's not speaking of other vegetables per se. And that would be true both in terms of green vegetables as well as quote unquote other vegetables. I thought Madeline's call on ginger or ginger powder that was in the first wine could perhaps pertain to this wine as well too. And then we get to that whole earth thing. There are some floral characters here. The floral characters here, again, tend to be in that more sort of a citrusy, elderflowery kind of vein. But what's interesting here is, to me, I'm picking them up both fresh and dried as well too. And there is this sort of very soft, almost hay component in the back, which I find sort of very attractive and draws me in at once. Now, palate-wise, well, there's that citrus I was looking for. It definitely hits you at the very front, and it really attacks the palate hard. What's interesting about the minerality, which is not only reasserting itself in the mouth from a palate standpoint, and this is a really wonderful example of it, is I always argue with people that minerality is both what you smell, but what you feel. And there is a grittiness to this wine, a very soft grittiness about it, as if somebody, if you're of that generation, can remember when you clack two chalk erasers together and some of that chalk dust gets into your mouth and it leaves sort of a drying, gritty film in there. This wine definitely gives me that. There's nothing in here that suggests oak. There's no roundness. There's no structural smoothness to it. The wine is reasonably shrill by nature, although it's starting to soften and polish off at the edges. And again, speaks very much to what it smells like, with, again, that sort of inorganic minerality driving the wine. As far as specific things go, my acid here is probably medium plus. If anything, I'd lean higher than I'd lean lower to it. It's not phenolic per se. I'm picking up anything bitter about the wine. The alcohol in it is moderate, which is reflected both in the tears, lack of heat in the nose, and the fact that my chest cavity is about ho-hum in terms of warmth. The wine is long for sure. It's got an excellent finish to it. It's obviously bone dry. What I'm noticing about it, though, and I'm curious to follow the wine through the trajectory of the remainder of the tasting, it comes off to me as just a baby of a wine in terms of its development, its unraveling of flavors. And I'd really like to come back to this wine, not only at the end of the tasting, but several years from now, to see what and where it becomes. But it's also, I think, speaks very much to my last comment before we jump into our polling and our options here. It speaks very much from a singular voice. And I think that's something that's important to think about as you're trying to assess where you might decree its provenance to be.
Excellent. Evan, we have the options up if you want to.
Yeah.
I'm going to start the poll here.
Yeah. So what do we got here? Let's work. I mean, certainly if you're thinking about some other ideas, that would be there. Pinot Blanc, to sort of put the other flip side of the Pinot family that Madeline talked about before with Gris and Grigio. Pinot Blanc means white Pinot, and it tends to be sort of a light, bright, refreshing floral wine, but it doesn't really, it's kind of a click to the citrusy left of Pinot Grigio. It's not known for its verboseness or its strong personality. Torrontés, on the other hand, is sort of like what happens when Hawaiian Airlines meets a vegetable market. I mean, a fruit market. It's just this very expressive floral, for those people that use the word terpenic, sort of muscatty, Gewürzi-ish sort of grape, but coming from Argentina. Chardonnay can be a lot of different things. In many respects, it's a grape that is relatively neutral, reflective of its place, and then sort of adjusts itself based on what the artist, or in this case, a winemaker, wants to do with it. So it's not probably the only aromatic grape in there really is Torrontés, the other two being more non-aromatic to perhaps semi-aromatic in certain reflective spots. And then obviously we've got the place pushes there to go with the other things. Don't, by the way, as you're looking at your regions, think per se that just because, Torrontés is your Argentinian grape. There's some killer Chardonnay, for example, being made in Argentina these days. There's some interesting Torrontés actually being made in Australia. So don't necessarily think they're always one-to-one correspondences. Use your experience. Think about things like that too, because we are all about education.
Evan, there is one question, and this will buy you, those of you out there who are still thinking, about 30 seconds. Is there any MLF in this wine? And in this case, Evan, will you describe what MLF is for those who are not sure, and is there any MLF?
Okay, well, it's a very interesting question, and if those people who are familiar, MLF would stand for malolactic fermentation, which would be the process by which it's actually fermentation is a bit of a misnomer. It's really more of a conversion by which malic acid, the hard acid that you get primarily experientially through like green apples or underripe pears when you bite into them and they really kick you in the teeth, gets converted by the addition of a big bacterium, hence it's really not a fermentation, converts to lactic acid, which is of course what we associate with yogurt, creme fraiche, sour cream, still sharp, but a much softer sort of sharpness. During that process of converting the hard malic acid down to a softer lactic acid, it spews out a third-party byproduct called diacetyl, which for those of you who don't recognize that, that's what they call artificial butter flavoring, or I can't believe it's not butter, or can I have that fake butter on my popcorn at the movies, or whatever. You're generally going to get that. If you go full on malolactic fermentation, you're going to usually get that in some degree. If you prevent malolactic fermentation from happening, and that is a thing, you'll get zero of it. At times in red wines, you almost always do it because of the processes from a stability standpoint, you want to have it. But in white wines, many times people want to stop it because they don't want the malic, they don't want the acids to soften, they don't want the byproducts of that malolactic fermentation. Based on the flavor profile of this wine, I would say that if there is any, it would only be partial, but I can't see that making sense. So my gut would tell me probably not.
All right. On that note, we have the
Look
results.
at what we got.
Yep.
We've got the lion's share of folks in Chardonnay, and knee jerking it literally on a 1-to-1 with France. So that's a very interesting correlation there. The Torrentes shot, again, don't know if this wine is quite aromatic enough to be Torrentes, although there are certainly within the family of Torrentes selections are clones, some that are more neutral than others. Those of you who are used to the more Salteña or Mendocino clones would know that there's a difference between the two of those. Mendocino is much milder. The ones coming up from Salta are much more aromatic. Pinot Blanc, nice and safe and in the middle. And then be interesting to know what some of those thoughts were, but it does appear that most people, Viognier, again, I think very much in that Torrentes vein, probably not quite aromatic enough for doing so. But I think that the fact that so many people have ended up either in France or in Spain, in this case, literally 2/3, speaks to the very pronounced element of place or minerality in this one.
Yep. All right. So let's see where we're at. Evan, I also noticed that after you said Argentina, the votes came in, and now we're at 32% Argentina.
That's because people just know I'm enthusiastic about Argentina. So.
All right.
All right. So this grape, I think once people figure out what it is, and a lot of you probably did, is really going to make sense. So as we get into our virtual reality ride and we leave Italia, goodbye to our friends at Tiefenbrunner, we're going to get up. We're going to go up north. We're going to stay on the continent, but we're going to change countries and move next door slightly to the west. And we're going to end up in La Grande France. We're going to end up specifically in Burgundy. And we're going to end up in the northernmost part of Burgundy, which is an area called the Chablis, which is actually closer to Paris than it is the rest of the Côte d'Or, which people don't really think about that often. And here, of course, you're known for the Chardonnay grape, and arguably for many people, its most pure form. I think that this particular example of one, which we will learn momentarily, is a Premier Cru from a wonderful, renowned, slightly larger of the Premier Cru vineyards called Vaillant, is known for its strong mineral character. That's really what it's all about. This is a region that is demarcated by a very unique soil type referred to as Kimmeridgian marl, which is a combination of clay, of chalk, and of marine fossils. And if you've ever walked through the vineyards of Chablis, you can actually still find fossils in the vineyards, because at one point in time, this entire part of the world was completely underwater. And after the water receded and the critters died, they fossilized and became part and parcel of the soil, if you will, that is there. This particular Chablis Vaillant, as I said, is made by the grape family. If we want to switch slides over. Dompte, specifically of Vincent Dompte. And this is a family that is known, a long tradition of winemakers. Both his father, Daniel, and his grandfather, Jean de Fay, have been Chablis producers forever, and they own among some of the most highly regarded estates in Chablis. Vincent, who's the baby of the family, not a baby anymore, but he was a baby when he started, actually started producing, working the trade, if you will, when he was 14 years old. And I remind people that in Europe, oftentimes, you know, they look at you and they sort of decide, are you going to become an academic or are you going to go work? And the people that decide to go work, be they chefs or wine people or whatever, pick it early and get that practical experience early on. After he did that, and literally at the age of 14, enrolled himself in wine school at Beaune. When he graduated, he worked a little bit in the Jura, interesting segue, but then ended back up in Burgundy and worked for this little, I don't know if people have heard of this estate before, called Domaine Le Fleuve, maybe, in Pouligny-Montrachet, and then obviously went back to work for the family. So this man has great pedigree, great understanding. And like I said, the Vaillon is a vineyard that people, it's a good one to show people because it's one that you can, it's both a pedigree and you're going to find more of it. It's actually located in a little valley not too far away from the southwest town of Chablis itself, from which the region takes its name. Wonderful soil cutaway there to give you that sense of that fossilized materials and chalk and a little bit of clay holding it together, very blonde soils. And Vaillon is known for being a little bit more floral, but rustically minerally. And I think what you're seeing here is everything about the mineral, everything about the soil, that slight electric, refreshing character of the Chardonnay fruit. And it's wonderful. He makes basically Chablis Village. For those of you who've been with us before, we've shown the Chablis Village wine in a prior kit. But this one, I wanted to show you pedigree, and I wanted to show you what we do. And when you tighten the lens on Chablis, how much more definition and refinement you get. This wine is never even looked at a toothpick, much less spent any time in an oak barrel. It's all done in stainless steel with some batonnage, and perhaps being in the stainless steel and probably giving way to a little bit of reduction, if you will, or matte stickiness is maybe enhancing some of that minerality further. It is a 2020 vintage. Which gets a little bit more normal. 2019 was really warm, but I think we are seeing the effects of climate change in this part of the world. And the wines, very much like we talked about Sancerre being less Sancerre-like than it used to be, Chablis is certainly less like sucking on seashells as it once was, as riper fruit and climate change put in it. Nevertheless, this is still obviously a mineral-driven wine, obviously Chablis wine of the highest quality. And I'd encourage you after your very last red to come back to it. And for those of you who have any of this, I wouldn't touch it for a while. I'd leave it in my cellar, and it'll get more marmaladey, honeyed, and nutty over time, but still remain with all of that great mineral backbone.
I just want to jump in just for a second, Wayne, if you don't
please.
mind. That this to me actually, and I'm not arguing, just a little bit of a contrary view to the climate change. If anything, this to me, this particular Chablis is almost old-fashioned in the tightness of its expression. And
that's an OG.
It's just, if you want to know the definition of minerality in white wine, here she is, you know, and that poignant acidity, but structurally it feels like Chablis from the past in a way. And I don't mean in a negative old-fashioned way, just in that lean structure.
Austerity. And no, and you're right, Madeline. And I think one of people, particularly those people who are studying to become, you know, Jedi Knight juniors or Jedi Knights, one of the hardest things in Chablis these days is the wines are getting richer, they're getting rounder, they're getting fruitier, and they're not showing as much of their true historic.
They're yummier.
Grit. Yeah, and a wine like this may not appeal to everybody, and it needs time. But it really is la vraie chose, the real thing, as they say.
So Madeline and Tim have answered this question on chat, but I think, Evan, it's worth talking about because it is a difficult one, and this wine shows it well. Phenolic bitterness. How do you define it? Where does it come from? And what are you, from a sensory point, seeing it.
Yeah, I'm gonna kick the can over to Tim momentarily because this is really his area of expertise, and plus it can segue him into his wine, which will be wine 3. Phenolic bitterness is, phenolics are and bitterness comes from 2 places. It's going to come from barrels, tannins themselves, the tannins of barrels. If you spend time in a white wine, can pick up bitterness from wood, but more often than not, it comes from some form of skin contact. So grapes that we associate with skin contact, such as Torrentes, such as Gewürztraminer, such as Viognier to a degree, etc., have a naturally bitter element to them that is sort of leached out of the skins of the grapes over time and provide both an amaro or a bitter element, but it also picks up a bit of tannin too. So you get a little bit of pull from that too, which is different than an earth pull, but it's really more of a tannic pull. And that's my sense of it. I'm not getting any phenolic bitterness here at all. I'm just getting this sort of like literally sucking. If I were to go pull a rock from my the back of my thing over here, like sucking on that, there's just such intense minerality that it might come off as being to some people a little bit bitter by nature, but it's not phenolic bitterness in the classic definition, my opinion. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So everybody, phenolics is a big family of chemical compounds. There's over 300 of them. Tannins are actually in that family of compounds. And as Evan said, phenolics primarily 90+% of the time are from grape skins. And in particularly, we talk about them with white wines only. And as Evan mentioned, that's when you've got skin contact, usually before fermentation, sometimes after. In the case of orange wine, where you're leaving it on there for days, you've got a lot. But phenolic bitterness tastes bitter. And for me, it's on the finish, and it tastes like bitter almond skin or walnut skins. And I think the challenge for students is to separate it from used oak. And there, the idea being that oak always comes with other trappings. There's always other aromas and flavors, even if it's used oak. And phenolic bitterness in and of itself is just bitter. So my advice to you as your attorney is that we learn in binary very easily. And so the best way to learn this is that you could take a wine like this as a perfect example, where high acid, no phenolics whatsoever, and taste this against an Alsace Gewürztraminer, where you've got a ton of floral components, but you've also got a lot of phenolic bitterness because, relatively speaking, Gewürztraminer is very thick skin for a white grape. And even if you leave the juice in contact with the skins for a brief time, it's going to be really bitter. And on the finish, that despite the fact that the acidity is low and it could be a little sweet too. So my advice for that is to bite the bullet and buy a Coravan, right? You can get them for as cheap as $150, but that allows you to buy really good examples of wines in pairs, and you can taste them repeatedly for weeks, every day. And this one comes up, once you get this, you don't forget it. Yeah. And every time you smell a floral wine, you should expect phenolics on the finish. That's how it works. Okay. All right. So with all that fabulous information, let's go into wine number 3, which is the first red wine of the day. All right. And everybody, as we're holding it over against a white background, will notice that it's almost transparent. You can read through it. So this wine is made from a lighter pigmented, relatively speaking, thinner skin red grape. Your universe should have gotten just much narrower right then. It's a very pretty, medium ruby color that lightens up to a lighter pinkish ruby. So the wine is, relatively speaking, fairly young. Okay. And I don't know about you, but I just want to, I want to set the stage, because as you look at red wine, not so much white wine, although there are definitely tells about the appearance of white wine, but red wine, really the grapes fall into 2 major categories, most of them, not all of them. And they are these lighter pigmented, thinner skinned red grapes. And those grapes tend to be grown in cooler places, which means they're going to have less alcohol, higher acidity. They're going to be red fruit dominant. Odds are they're going to have a lot of non-fruit type components. And if they have oak, it's going to show. Okay. So let's see how much of that is true. All right. So then, taking that, anything else we can say? The wine, for a red wine, doesn't stain the glass. Makes sense. And also the tierce legs viscosity Marangoni is very medium. So again, it's following through with not a lot of color, meaning, not a lot of ripe fruit, probably not a lot of alcohol. On the nose, Okay, on the nose, it's following true to form. So it's predominantly red fruit and it's all sour. So sour cherry, cranberry, unripe strawberry, maybe even pomegranate. I'm not sure if that's considered a fruit. It's an animal, mineral, or vegetable, right? So beyond that, there's a touch of dark fruit, but again, it's a touch, and whatever it is, it's really tart. It's like blackberries, very high-toned acidic blackberries. Everything, all the fruit is fresh and ripe. Yeah. And then for non-fruit, and I thought there might be more than fruit, and that's actually true. So at the top of the glass, there is some floral, really pretty rose petals, maybe hibiscus. And then from there, there's a whole plethora, a veritable plethora of things that have to do with herbal, but also there's star anise, there's verbena, there's laurel, there's some leafy greens, which to me is very unusual for a wine with this little color. It's not something I usually expect. There's some brown mushrooms. What else? There's a little bit of sassafras and cola, which to me could be the oak. There is definitely a soil component, a little dustiness, and almost a saline-like visine quality to it too, which is very interesting to me. And then, of course, there is some oak, and it's mixed. It's low, used oak predominantly, I think, but again, it makes itself known in the form of spices, a little bit of kola nut, and a little bit of tea, like black tea. Okay. In terms of the structure, let's taste it for science. So everything I thought in the beginning is actually true. Restrained alcohol, it's medium at best. I wonder if this is even 13%. Medium plus acidity. So again, this is a cool climate. But also, just want to comment on the quality here. The concentration of the wine and the quality is just really, really good, which to me speaks to a place, wherever this is from, where it's a cool growing place, but at the same time, there's long hang time. So the grapes are on the vines here for a long time, which explains why there's so much going on in the wine. And the length of finish is long, the quality is very high. This is lovely wine. Okay, Li Meng, the envelope, please.
All right.
All right, what do we got here? There are your three suspects.
Colonel Mustard.
So my mind just went to Clue, the movie Clue, right? All right, so Gamay, Pinot Noir, Dolcetto, and then your choices of place are Old World Italy, Old World France, New World Oregon, New World Argentina. All right, so we'll let you, ponder these mysteries and see
That
what you come up
acidity
with.
is really high, Tim. So,
Yeah, it is. It is.
is that the dominant clue here?
No, there is no one dominant thing. But looking at your three possibilities, if this becomes the process of elimination, and if you know the impact compounds and markers for all three, you whittle two of them away fairly quickly. Okay, and I think we should talk about that after we, reveal the answer.
Excellent. Well, people, half of you have already decided. If you want to throw out some questions for Tim as the rest of you are going through, please do. It's really helpful. You guys are a very active bunch. And I love how Andrea is so upfront in saying that she had guessed Pinot Noir from New Zealand, but we didn't give it as an option. So there you go. How is it not New Zealand, Tim?
Why is it not in New Zealand? New Zealand is actually a pretty good guess, but that's assuming that we're on Pinot Noir. Okay. So, in terms of the floral components and the tart quality of the fruit and the vegetal type things, herbal type things, yeah, that's not a bad guess. Okay. But there's something I did say that tipped me off to it being from an other than usual place. Okay. So I'm reading Christian's comment. Is black tea a wood clue? Christian, possibly, but sometimes it's also a clue for stem inclusion if you're using whole cluster or semi-whole cluster fermentation. So yeah, that's a good question.
That's a really good question. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're going to end the poll. So let's see where the results are, and then we can go from there. You've got 72% on Pinot, 22% on Dolcetto, and 6% on Gamay. And as we look down at regions, I mean, we're kind of all over the place here, Tim. We got 50-50 on New World
Okay,
versus Old
let's-
World. So I guess the question is, how are you going to go Old World versus New World on this one?
Okay, now we're going to do the whole thing very quickly because I'm watching my time. First of all, those of you, everybody went everywhere but Gamay. Good choice. Because, if you look at this color, if this was, Beaujolais Gamay, and it's this color, it's going to be Beaujolais Village, in which case you're going to have carbonic maceration. So you're going to have the Jolly Rancher Tutti Frutti candy and the stem inclusion. You got none of that. All right. So that's why we're moving out of the way. If it was Cru Beaujolais, it would have a lot more color, richness, denseness, complexity, on, and maybe not carbonic. Okay. Because that's not a given with Cru Beaujolais. All right. So I'm going to move down to Dolcetto. This Dolcetto has more color. It just does. And it doesn't have this acidity, and it would be earthier, and the fruit would be darker. So, and the structure
Would have
be
more
similar, but
tannin
again,
too,
doesn't
wouldn't
have
it,
the
Tim?
acidity.
Wouldn't
What's that?
Dolcetto
Yeah,
have a little
exactly,
more
Danny.
tannin? Mhm.
Absolutely. I was just going to get to that. Yeah, good call. And then so finally that leaves us squarely in the Pinot Noir camp. And the question is where? And so here, what dominates the wine? Is fruit, or other than fruit, specifically earth? And there's not enough earth to take me to Burgundy with this. And also with Burgundy in this kind of color, I would be expecting either a village wine or a regional wine, in which case odds are stem inclusion and, partial whole cluster. And you don't got that. What I said buried in all my, meanderings was I said there was a leafy quality that to me was really curious, a dark leafy quality that it was unusual for me. And if anything, that's going to take me to someplace like New Zealand. But in this case, that saline quality, also distinctive. I would have to go to, someplace that's unusual. And in this case, Argentina. So let's take a trip. Fasten those seat belts. We're going from Burgundy.
Whoa, my goodness, getting
Yeah.
car sick.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so we're in Argentina. And we are at Huapiza. The winery. This is coastal Argentina in Patagonia. This is like 25 miles from the Atlantic. It's a very, very distinctive place. And, reading the notes, and Patricia's on this. So hopefully, Patricia, you're going to be around in the extra happy half hour. Because, I'd love to hear you say more about this, but this is a very distinctive Pinot Noir in terms of a sense of place. The vineyard is called Finca Los Acantilados, which means the cliffs. The soils are limestone and clay, again, very unusual. And again, to me, it's distinctive because the intensity, it's like a quiet storm, and that this really builds on your palate. The intensity is very deceptive for wine with so little color, and really delightful. I think what will also impress people about this is that this wine is going to age. It really has the structure for long-term aging. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my distinguished colleagues for their thoughts.
And for sorry, I'm just going to throw in a couple of things that are coming out. Evan, I'm going to push them to you because you are an Argentinian expert here too. Elle says, didn't know that Pinot was grown in Argentina. That's a good jumping off point for you, Evan. And then
Yeah.
Natalie has, I didn't know that Argentina has cool climates. So what would you say to that?
Well, first of all, Argentina is certainly not known. I think people, once you move beyond Malbec and Cabernet Sauvignon, people fall off the clock. Pinot Noir is very limited where it does really well, and most of that is in the south. And again, remember that as you go south, you're actually getting cooler, not warmer, as you approach, Antarctica, if you will. And plus, you've got the proximity to the water there, so your climate is going to be moderate. You have lower altitude down in the south than you do in the rest of Argentina. So you're getting this intensity, but it's a very intense season, but it's a very short season relative to that. So you do get the ability of grapes that do well in cool climates, most notably Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, as excelling in this part of the world. So Patagonia in general, and coastal Patagonia is brand new. I believe Patricia and friends, she's about the only person out there at this point in time. Most of it is relegated further west into two areas, one called Rio Negro, which is the oldest and most developed area, certainly for Pinot Noir, and one that's more recent called Neuquén. And Pinot Noir, my personal feeling is the best Pinot Noirs in Argentina right now are still coming from the south. There's some interesting, exceptional wines coming from Mendoza right now in Pinot Noir, but they tend to be more exceptions rather than the general rule, whereas really well-made Pinot Noir is something that you can find across Patagonia today. Both sides, by the way, Chilean side as well as Argentinian side.
I love the label.
Pisa means whale, right? There's the tail of the whale.
Oh, very cute. That makes sense. As usual, I'm throwing in all the questions. We're running late, so we're gonna keep moving. But anything else, Tim, that you want to add? And for those of you who are staying for Happy Half Hour, hopefully Patricia is also staying, but she is in the room listening in.
Okay.
Quite a view, huh?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And there we go. That's the team.
Awesome.
Hello, Patricia.
All right, so now for something completely different, as they say on TV. Think back to my comments a few minutes ago about the appearance of red wine and how much it can tell you. So this wine compared to, wine 3 is completely different. So this is opaque. I can't read through it. It is a very deep ruby red with purple, with a very dark pinkish purple rim that's very narrow. So once again, a wine that's fairly young, but this is from a deeper pigmented, thicker skinned red grape, right? And so once again, that would narrow your universe about what the potential grape could be. And unlike the Pinot Noir, this wine stains the glass. At the same time, the Tier's Legs La 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 is medium plus. So yeah, all right. And then on the nose. Okay, so I'm just going to rewind for a second. Remember my line of thinking for the Pinot Noir with so little color. I was expecting red fruit dominant, less alcohol, higher acidity, sour red fruit, lots of non-fruit. Here we're going to go in a different direction with some added dimension. So here I'm expecting a warmer place, dark fruit dominant, higher alcohol, less natural acidity with the potential for acidification, which is where you add tartaric acid, but also, potentially a lot of non-fruit too, but that depends on the grape variety. So we're going to discover that. Okay, with all that, here we go. And it's all true. So
like you planned it that way.
This is a veritable melange of fruit. Most of it is dark, as in blackberry, black plum, black cherry, also, and so a mix of ripe and really tart dark fruit, which makes me think of warm place but elevated. And then there's some really tart red fruit in there too. And this is, and maybe some ripe strawberry, sour cherry, cranberry, things like that. But there's un poquito, as we say here in New Mexico. There's a little bit of dried raisiny type fruit too. And that speaks to me of a grape that may not ripen evenly. That's important. Okay. Other things that are, this wine has a ton of non-fruit type things. So there is floral at the top of the glass. It's kind of a almost Mediterranean potpourri. And otherwise than that, there is black pepper, there are savory dried meat, there's hoisin, soy. There's a whole lot of, savory type things, as the Brits would say. So there's, not quite game, but it is dried jerky, bacon, things like that. And, and really savory. Underneath all that, there is some dried green, herbs like oregano, maybe some laurel, mushroom. There are some earthy qualities here, but they do not dominate the wine. That's important to know because there's so much fruit up front, but there is a dusty, rocky quality and a stony quality, especially on the palate. Wood is definitely here. It's once again mixed. There's a little bit of new wood because I can detect there's some vanilla and kind of like coffee notes and bitter chocolate. And then on the palate, real quick sip. And I always think when you go to call the structure, retaste the wine, wait for 3 to 5 seconds, because structure for most people, self-included, is delayed response. And here, okay, so warmth here. So this wine is 14-ish alcohol, bordering on high. The acid, notice with your salivary glands, they're really happy now. You're giving them a break after the last wine. The acid here is just bordering on medium plus, but balanced, but it's not like the previous wine. The tannins are moderate plus. and not a lot of grape tannins front of the mouth, more oak tannins in the back. The finish is long. The complexity for the wine is like medium plus plus. A lot going on here. I think the thing for you that's important is the range of different qualities of fruits, but also all the savory, non-fruit type notes that we talk about. Okay, all right. And that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. So I have the poll up here. We're calling it the Guinea poll. There are some of the same characters that you had. Would Evan put 2 Pinots side by side? Is this possibly a Pinot? Evan would put 2 Pinots side by side, but I think Tim has probably dissuade most of you from the Pinot by now. We'll do a very quick one because we are running out of time. Madeline and Evan, I'm just going to give you a chance to speak about this wine, what you're thinking as people are filling out the poll.
Maddie? You're on mute.
There we go. I really think that Tim's comment about savory is something worth paying attention to, and also especially since it's secondary or tertiary flavor that you'd be getting. You know, sometimes you have to be a little patient, especially when you're blind tasting. And I keep going back to your comment, Tim, that there's something in you that is desperate to know what the wine is, you know, and to call it. Yes. So when it comes to secondary and tertiary fragrances and flavors, you have to be a little patient. So, you know, the issue of hoisin, soy, dried meat, those are back notes, you know, but if you're patient and you wait until the primary stuff moves out of the way, you know, you will perceive it. In this case, to me, it's coming through more on the palate than aromatically. But again, you might get it in either place. I think, by the way, the quality. Oh, whoa! Look at this conclusion.
There you go.
Hello. I bet the color has something to do with that. You know.
But yes, look at the regions. We're kind of all over too. Yeah. I mean, more New World.
Yeah.
Whoa, Spain. Excellent.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I just want to say, you know, if we go, okay, I have to be Inigo Montoya here and sum up. Okay. So yeah, everybody's firmly in the Syrah camp, and all my yakking on about the savory things. Absolutely. So the question from there, you got to ask yourself, Syrah from where? And is it earthy and minerally enough to be from the Northern Rhone? Is it? And then otherwise, Spain, possible. I know they have Syrah in places. Washington State, yeah, good call for the New World. Australia, you know, and this is just my opinion for my dear friends and colleagues, I think the Australians do tannin management as well or better than any winemakers on the planet. They just do. And if this were Australian wine, I would just suspect that the tannins to be more polished. That's all. Because the tannins in the finish are a little gritty to me. So, you know, again, Old World is earthy enough. And to me, no, there's a ton of fruit on this wine and it's savory things. But when I get to the mineral and earth part, it's about this much. Yeah. So, you know, okay. All right. So let's fasten our seatbelts, put on our crash helmets, and let's see where we're going.
Bye-bye, Argentina.
So, Tim, as we're going there, why is it not a Zin in your mind? We have a comment.
Who is that? I want to say, who said that?
Kristen.
Who said? Okay, yeah, and you know, that's a great guess. And you know what Zinfandel and Syrah, especially ripe New World Syrah, have in common is that they don't ripen evenly. So you have really raisinated and really underripe fruit in the same glass. But Zinfandel does not have all the savory, peppery, hoisin, jerky. It doesn't have that. It just doesn't. But that's, you know, and that's a good way to compare them. Okay, but here we are. We're in Washington State. This particular vineyard is in Yakima Valley. It's called Bouchy. And this is the 2018 Two Vintners waiting list. Two Vintners, a partnership between winemaker Morgan Lee and then the owners of Covington Vineyard, which are David and Cindy Lawson. And they formed a partnership in 2007 because they had a Dylan Thomas thing going, which is rage against the dying of the light, meaning, translated, is that they love Merlot and Syrah, but the two grapes and wines at the time were so out of fashion. And they thought the world must know, they must see good examples of these two wines. And so they started making small lots from really good vineyards in Yakima. And I just made all that up, by the way. And so this is made from the Bushi vineyard, and the cheeky name of the wine means that Morgan Lee had to wait for years on a waiting list to get the fruit, and I can't blame him. So he let
I
people
love the
know.
label.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So that's it. They make really small lots of a lot of different grapes and wines and regions, all with very cheeky titles. But I think these guys are really good. They make one of the best white Zinfandels of anyone, and they make it in small quantities, and it is utterly delicious. I've had it before. So, all right. So, what else can we say about this? Partners in crime. What do you
No,
think?
I would just say that for those people that know me, know that I think Morgan Lee is one of the great rising stars up in Washington State. And those are the Covington folks, David and Cindy, and then Morgan's sort of younger and cool. And not these people aren't young and cool, but he is really a terrorist in that true regards. He makes a couple of Syrahs. He makes this one. He makes a couple that come from the rocks down in the Walla Walla area as well too, and just a really committed vintner. He's got some cool amphora stuff going on too for people who are interested in that, and just a gem of a human being, I might add too. I think that this is a grape variety that over time is going to be increasingly the calling card for Washington State. Whether you look at what Morgan's doing or what Greg Harrington's doing over at Gramercy, what Doug Frost has done over at Echolands, we've used his wines before. There's just a number of really excellent examples of pure Syrah, but also Syrah-driven blends as well too. Question I did see pop across the screen. I'm not technologically that good, so I have to read them there. Was, do we ever do blends of wines? And the answer is clearly yes. Sometimes these tend to be more varietally driven. Sometimes they're blended driven, but Washington with Syrah blends is actually done really, really well. And the question about Australia versus Washington earlier, I just wanted to say that most of the Australian ones tend to be these very fruit-driven bomb wines that you're finding there. You do find some cool climate stuff, particularly in Great Western and the Grampians, maybe perhaps, or in area around Mount Langi. Mount Langi Kiron makes a very Rhone style wine, but generally the New World wines. Washington sort of splits the gap between Northern Rhone and Australia as a New World style. It's very, very interesting that way.
Great.
So, all right, I'm going to go relatively at a good clip here because I know Madeline is always sweet enough to finish the end of things, and I never
I'm going to
leave
get
her
1
enough
minute,
time.
Evan.
No, I'm going to go quicker. So let's take a look at this wine really fast. And it's moderate. I encourage you to look at it alongside the wine that we just had. And it's a little bit darker at this point in time. Maybe that's because my glass is less full, but nothing particularly distinguishing. Maybe just a little touch of rusting or oranging around the edge of it, which might suggest a little bit of age or something like that. But it looks to me to sort of be medium extraction, probably a medium, light to medium skin grape, maybe a lighter skin grape, but grown in a warmer area. I don't know, but nothing that's going to make me go, oh, at this point in time. I'm rolling my glass around looking for staining, and I'm seeing perhaps a very, very light staining there. So I'm not expecting a gargantuan wine. I'm not expecting a super extracted wine. I'm expecting a wine that's sort of elegant plus, if you will, and personality there. In terms of aromas, this definitely has a wonderful combination of fresh and dried characters of fruit. You're definitely getting dried and fresh and dried characters of everything. So my fruit character here, I'm getting raspberries, I'm getting bitter cherries, but I'm also getting a lot of herbs, and they are again sort of fresh and dried simultaneously, and just some interesting collection of other flavors that just sort of fit into this vein. I'll come bring it up a little bit later on. But in terms of it's tangy, it's a bit bright, it's focused here, and subtly tannic even on the nose of the wine, which is sort of peculiar. You don't oftentimes smell tannin, but I'm picking up a slight bitterness here that I'm actually attributing to tannin on the wine. In the mouth, it's vibrant. Let's work backward from the acidity is quite bright. The acidity is enhancing the tannins here, and the tannins are present, but they're not hard, they're not gritty, they're not grippy. I think the wine we just came off of had bigger tannins than this one did. There's something almost, dare I say, Pinot-like going on here in this wine. It seems kind of elegant to me, although it doesn't taste like Pinot Noir at all. So that's sort of something to hang on to there. It does speak to a singular variety, but there is something else going on there too. Again, that could be the variety, that could be the place, etc. The flavor-wise, it pretty much mimics what I talked to you about before. A lot of red, primarily more red fruited than black fruited, no blue fruits at all. And again, a combination of fresh and dried. There are elements of sort of very sort of bright raspberry, but there's also like raspberry fruit leather, also like you put in your kid's lunchbox on their way to school. And there's wonderful red and black plums, but there's also, you know, a slight prune character to it. And then there's some potpourri, there's dried herbs, there's a dried mint almost or something like that, a whole sort of series of things that seem like they go together, but they're also disparate at the same time. And sort of what, you know, the tannins start out hard, but they finish soft. It's actually quite cool. Very interesting wine, very cerebral wine, I might add to. And spend some time in oak. Definitely some oak here, but not new oak, probably older oak, but still smaller in size, I think. I don't think it's big.
Awesome. I am going to, by now, everyone knows the drill. I'm going to launch the poll.
Maddie, I'm going to give you more than 1 minute. Okay, so what do we got here? We've got a couple of choices. We've got Carmenere, which could be part of a blend. Carmenere is a solo grape, but it's also used in part of so-called Bordeaux-ish blends. We've got Cabernet Franc as a blend, with the two of those both share in common, for those of you experienced with it, is they both tend to be a little greener and a little bit more herbal. We have Tempranillo as part of a blend, or again, this could be a blend or solo. Either way, Tempranillo is a grape that is very chameleon-like, depending where in Iberia it's grown. It's grown in Spain, but we also know it's grown in Portugal too, where you find it in the Alentejo, you find it up in the Douro, you find it all over Spain, and you find different clones of it, very much the way you find different clones of, say, Sangiovese in Italy. And we have our associated spots down on the bottom. So have at it. Fun wine. Fun wine.
We've got a comment here about the umami as well. You're getting a lot of that umami in this wine?
Yeah, you're getting, that's part of that sort of profile of quote unquote other flavors that I was getting. I would say it's not coming off so much as umami. I'm getting kind of maybe a little bit of that umami is usually associated with mushrooms, I might add, and tomato skins and stuff like that, both of which are here. The mushroomy nature here tends to be a little bit more dried. I'm getting like porcini powder, more than I am getting fresh, underbrushy, after the rains and the warm weather comes out kind of mushrooms. I am getting a little bit of tomato leaf, tomato skin, which is associated umami character. So maybe not so much the soy or glutamate character to it, but the more organic side of it. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. All right. Here, Evan, you've got your work cut out. I think there is some confusion and difficulty with Carmenere, Cabernet Franc, and distinguishing that from
well, Carmenere, and again, most of the Carmenere we associate with Chile, of course, and that's where the preponderance of it is grown. And actually, there's a bit in China as well too. But most of it in Chile, unless it's grown really well, tends to be really green, really pyrrhizinic, kind of mean, and tends to be bolder and bigger than this, even at the more sort of more everyday entry level of the wines. This wine to me doesn't have as much of that greenness to it and hardness. Cabernet Franc tends to be softer, but also very strong, leafy, bay leaf, leaves in general. But that raspberry fruit, I think, is a good tie for it to be Cabernet Franc. And Tempranillo can be lots of different of things there. So we're led by Tempranillo here, Carmenere secondary call, and then Cabernet Franc there, and then Spain getting 40% of the votes below, followed by a combo of Chile and Argentina. So
how would it help you define whether it's more old or new? Because it's basically 50-50.
Yeah, I would say if it was more new, I would be expecting more fruit by nature. And although there is fruit here, and I did talk about it, it's not screaming at you. It's not beating you over the head there. The fruit elements are at best par with all of the other elements in the wine, and the wine's structure, the acidity level, etc. I don't know, it screams a little bit more old world to me, but I can understand why some people might think it's new.
All right, so we're going from Washington.
Goodbye, Washington. That's actually Woodinville, because the grapes, as we know, are all on the other side of the Cascade Mountains. We're switching continents again. We're going back. We're in Iberia. We're hitting over to Spanish part of Iberia, and we're going smack dab, essentially in the epicenter of Castilla y León, in the appellation of the Ribera del Duero. And this wine is, in fact, labeled as a Ribera del Duero, which means it has to fuss on all of the laws there, which are amongst some of the most restrictive, I might add, for red wines here. This is an area that very much like Tuscany in Italy have a lot of producers saying your rules are too restrictive. I want to make different wines. I'm going to leave making Ribera del Duero wines and make other wines and call them Vino de la Tierra de Castilla y León, or in the case of Spain, they would say, super Tuscan wines, etc. But this is a lovely house. This is the house of Penalba Lopez. That's the family that owns it. It sits in the Ribera del Duero, and it's a winery called Finca Torremilanos. The wine itself is called Los Cantos. Los Cantos means the stones, and this is because of the larger sort of stones. I wouldn't put them in the Gallet level of what you would find in, say, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but they're sizable stones that you find in the 5 different estates that contribute to that, all of which are not far away from old riverbeds. They're slightly alluvial in nature and add a presence to the wine. You would find, in general, the question is wood. It's a lot of it is style. I think the challenge we have today with Ribera del Duero wines is that we focus on 2 things. Number one, two houses, most notably that of Vega Sicilia and Tinto Pesquera. We're probably 2 category leaders there, maybe Emilio Moro, etc. And old-fashioned ideas. These wines were made initially uber extracted, really heavily oaked, big wines, the biggest wines arguably of Spain at the time, perhaps with the exception of Toro nearby. But these wines today are moving in a more elegant direction. I actually think this is probably more reflective of the Nueva Garda of what you're finding in Ribera del Duero today. The winery itself sits just outside of the town of Aranda del Duero. All the little towns are like Aranda del Duero, etc. del Duero, Rio de Duero, that are named there. It's where they have the post office and other things here. And there's been wine made on this estate since literally 1903. But it wasn't until 75 when the family bought it that they really started to focus on wine, producing their own wine rather than selling the fruit off, et cetera, and increasing their production. They now have close to 500 acres of primarily Tempranillo. This wine is 95% Tempranillo, 5% Merlot. That Merlot may be what's softening it in your mind's eye a little bit, but they also believe in minimal oak. These are older, larger types of barrels here. Not casks, but not barrique either. The vineyards have an average age of about 35 years old, so you do get a profoundness to them. And it's a very sort of seamless wine. It has a great energy about it, but it's not, if you will, it's a, remember I was saying it was Pinot Noirish, or it's almost a Burgundian approach towards Tempranillo in an area that's known for producing bigger wines. So I bring this up to you from an educational standpoint because you should be looking out for wines like this, because I think you're starting to see this wave take hold in Ribera del Duero. You'd never get a wine like this on an exam. Don't worry, don't fret, anything like that. But I do think it speaks to the side of a gentler, happier, less angsty Ribera del Duero than what we've seen in the past, and one that is not, layered with liquored, vanilla, heavy oak and sort of ponderous and syrupy, which I think is why a lot of people were turned off of Ribera del Duero outside of course, obviously Vega Sicilia, which is its own unicorn of a wine before, and some of the other people. I think it's lovely.
Yeah, that's frankly why I thought it couldn't be Tempranillo, because it didn't have that sort of big American oak.
Well, it could be if it were from Rio.
Rioja.
It could be Rioja, exactly. Or it could be that. But I really wanted to. Again, I do believe in education. I think this is something worth following.
All right. Well, last question. Very quick answer from you. Ty asked, for the first time, I felt that I maybe got this smell of wine and thought salty. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's anything that you would have contributed to that character?
There's spiciness to this wine, and there's a series of flavors that are referred to as balsamico. And balsamico is a combination of everything from fresh herbs to dried herbs, from curry and incense to mints to all these other things, all coming together. And if you throw those things together, they're going to generate this interesting electricity. And while it doesn't come off to me as a saline character, I am getting sort of a very high tone spice character that is actually in combination with the acid prickling my mouth a little bit away, which may, again, everyone's mouth is different. You might interpret it in a different way. But Balsamico is literally, I think I sent, Tim, didn't I send you and Madeline both the profile of the Balsamico thing that I pulled from a vineyard one time? And there's about 14 or 15 flavors that contribute to this profile. And once you start tasting Spanish wines, and particularly Tempranillo, you'll start to find that fang, if you will, in all of the wines to varying different degrees.
Great. All right.
Maddie, you have 10 minutes.
She's got almost
Not
10
two.
minutes here.
There you go.
Go for it, Maddie.
Okay, parting shot, by the way, very simple. I like to take it down sometimes to simplicity on the Ribera. There's some things that really speak the growing region to me. It's very earthy. It's got a dusty earthiness that is hard to ignore, a dusty quality to it. There's a little Brettanomyces on it. There's leather, which adds complexity. I think the wine is showing an oxidative character due to a significant amount of wood, even though we're not getting a wall of American oak. And finally, there's perfect tension between the acidity and the tannin. And that is what will drive blind tasting candidates crazy when they start thinking, geez, oh, Pete, could this be Sangiovese, But I think the expression of oak will nudge you closer to Spain. You're still in north central Spain, even though you're south of Rioja, but I think it's really a lovely wine. Okay, I have 6.5 minutes. Yay!
You do, and this is a special treat.
This is,
and
really put your seatbelt on for something utterly and completely different. And in this case, if you're going to slam past this visual, go back to it, because I'm counting somewhere between 6 to 12 different hues in this wine. The center being actually translucent and a true ruby red, moving very slowly to reds with just hints of yellow in it, hints of orange in it, and even hints of brown. And the very rim has a yellow tone to it with a little bit of orange. I mean, it is speaking of what? Oxidative winemaking just by looking at it. Then when you put the nose in the glass, I've spent my career mentoring people, telling them, don't try to decide just when you look at it and smell it, but it's going to be damn hard to do when you put your nose in this glass, because all other things aside, one of the first things you get is alcohol, correct? You get an alcohol level that is elevated and actually even soaring beyond high levels of alcohol that we normally associate with wine, like 14, 15, even 16%. And then the other thing you get is an immediate impression of sweetness that's impossible to ignore. It smells like burnt sugar. And I'm going to tell you beyond that, I think I'm going to take it on the palate so I can speak to both the nose and the palate. But immediately the question is going to come, why does it look and smell like this? What is the cause of it? When you have that oxidative character, the smell of a wine that obviously has seen age in oak for a long period of time, or I should say wood, and where the quality of fruit, even before you start putting your mind on it, is beyond overripe to raisinated and confected. So the why will occur to you. Yes, it's very unexpected, but really pretty, isn't it? So on the palate, I'm swallowing it. It is utterly delicious. I am not spitting this out. I will tell you, they probably should have put Tim on this because he's more expressive than I am, but even little me is going to get, I have to hold myself back from how much complexity is in this wine, starting with certainly that resinated fruit, black dried figs. The condition are overripe, raisinated, dried, cooked, dominantly black. Then immediately there's a wave of confected citrus rinds, specifically orange and tangerine, and a little bit of bitterness from the pith. And then right after that, I get these most beautifully dried apricots. Beyond that, marmalade tones in terms of the quality of the fruit. Mid-palate, I'm getting red fruit as well, which we don't have on the grid, but like beautiful dried Michigan cherries, right? We have a little bit of peppery character to it too. There's spice. There is a whole range of dessert flavors, like, you know, creme brulee comes to mind, toasted nuts that have been sugared, you know, fruit cake, hello, Christmas cake, which combines dark, roasted, nutty raisin. We've got pecan, we've got brittle. There's a strong oxidation to this wine. And trying to shut up for a minute and zone in on the mouthfeel, there is mouth-watering acidity to this wine, which is really a surprise. The alcohol is not quite as elevated as I expected from smelling it, because the wine has a terrific balance, and it manages to be both extraordinarily long, with the acidity, I think, carrying it beyond the sweetness. It doesn't finish in the distant sweet. It finishes cleansing, oddly, go figure. The alcohol certainly gives it weight and a roundness, though it leans out in the finish. The alcohol is, you know, if I had to guess, probably 18-ish, something like that, but I'm not much of a numbers girl when it comes to trying to, you know, count alcohol levels. There's a creaminess to this wine also. The term rancio comes to mind, which sounds icky because it will make you think of rancid, but it's actually a term that's used often in fortified wine trade for this kind of fragrance. So we have oxidative character, we have wood, we have you know, a range of candied and dried fruits. We have exotic spices that I haven't even touched on, and a little bit of pepper spice as well. Yes, it is sweet. I didn't even get to that, but to be honest with you, other elements of the wine are so compelling to me that the sweetness doesn't command my attention. Bravo. I really think it's beautifully executed. The sweetness to me is utterly balanced and not the punchline of this wine. I think you could actually drink this wine slightly cooler earlier on in a dining experience. You wouldn't have to have it as dessert or with dessert. I think it would be spectacular with something salty or a type of, you know, more of biscotti type dessert. Really beautiful wine. And if the term, you know, I'll just give you the baby, you know, what's going to occur to you and you're staring at this wine 6 final guess. What do those 3 puppies have in common? Madeira, Oloroso, Sherry, and Tawny Port. They're all fortified, correct? They're all old world. There are certainly other examples of fortified wine that are noble throughout the world, but certainly those 3 expressions will bring to bear the amount of wood and age that you're seeing in this wine. Options of Madeira, Douro Valley, Andalusia, and other old world. If something occurs to you,
I mean,
more.
I think you guys, I'm talking about the master sommeliers here, kind of pick 3 from an education standpoint that have sort of that hue-ish range. And so if anyone wants to help us lay people here, what is the real difference between each of those kinds, Madeira, Amalmsey, Oloroso sherry versus, you know, your Finos and what have you, and a Tawny? You know, what is the defining characteristic of each of these?
You know, for me, you know, not just lightly, first of all, from a color standpoint, I think Madeira generally has a little green hue to me in the very rim of it. This doesn't have, and I think it will be more aggressively sweet and probably a little bit darker. I don't know if I'm going to speak to Oloroso sherry. I haven't had one in recent memory, but certainly this speaks Tawny Port. It could be older than 10-year, actually. And don't forget, if it's a Tawny, you know, it's not quantified to the number on the bottle. It's the expression of a style. Tim or Evan, do you want to speak to what Oloroso would incarnate as?
His hand. Tim, go for it.
Yeah, but you know, if I talk about it, we're gonna change everybody's decision. So Oloroso sherries are totally curious animals because they're basically, you're making wine from raisins. So they're pressing must. It's basically syrup. And when it gets to 2 or 3 alcohol fermenting, they fortify it. So an Oloroso sherry would be sweeter than a Malmsey Madeira and a 10-year-old tawny port put together. It is so sweet, it makes your teeth hurt. So Madeira, to me, generally speaking, whatever it is, has insanely high acidity, which means if you sell it long term, you don't put it horizontally and stand it up because the acidity will basically degrade the cork after a while. Anyway, so yeah, they're all oxidative, they're all fortified, but those are 3 very, very different wines.
Yeah, and from a color standpoint, oftentimes they're Madeline was saying green. There can be sort of a yellowish hue to some of the color, like particularly towards the outer edge of some of those wines. The thing with ports that's sort of interesting to get around is that 10-year in this case, if you're looking at a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year old 10, that really speaks to the average age of the blend. So you're tasting against, as Madeline said, a certain style, but it's hard to, you can't wrap your arms around it because it's not like everyone's working to the same formula. Your indication of what a 10-year average age might be less old, and more middle and this and that versus somebody else's, but they do have an approach. Their acids tend to be lower than theirs, and as Tim said, Olorosas, particularly the sweeter Olorosas, tend to be very intense.
I've got to say bravo to everyone. I mean, we can reveal it. This to me is a tawny port worth memorizing, in terms of one that's beautifully executed. It is from a port house called Dow, who has a very specific style for their ports. They have what they refer to as a trademark dry edge, which is showing here, and I think is demonstrated in the aftertaste. I think the balance of this is just gorgeous, and I think it also shows you that 10-year is not lesser than 20. And if you're buying tawny ports for restaurants, there can be a significant price difference between the two. This is executed by the Symington family who own Dow's, and they've been around for, several generations. I'm sure you can read about port production. I don't need to hold your hand through it, but I think it's important to know, in my opinion, that this is a style of sweet wine that can be an ambassador for people who never touch wine with sweetness because of its complexity, because of its lift, and because of the acidity. I spent 1 year of my career in restaurants I gave away one thing, and it was tawny port. I just would go in the dining room at the end of the meal and pour everyone a splash of a tawny, and I got a lot of smiles. I think it's a really beautiful execution.
Yeah, I love the comments. Thank you so much for everyone who's participating and being so engaged. It's really helpful. And kudos as usual. I have to give props. I'm always amazed by Evan Goldstein and his selection. I mean, bravo. What a killer flight. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Sometimes, as I'm saying in chat, it is a risk. I always look at Evan and go, what? Sweet? Are you sure?
And to somebody's comment, not every single kit, but a couple of times a year, it's fun to throw something in there, and and also start playing with fortified wines. We really haven't done that so much of late.
And by the way, get on Google Earth and look at the Douro. Here's one shot, but it's staggeringly beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw it in the Google Earth too, where it literally sat on the Douro River, but you could see that the slopes. I can tell you horror stories of bus drivers in Douro.
By the way, everybody, Douro River, Portugal, Douro River, where we just came from,
Same
river, different country, different aspect.
Yeah.
Bravo to everyone who's tasting today. You were very forthcoming, and that takes a measure of courage to put yourself out there, but it's a safe zone.